She doesn't scream. She doesn't threaten. She doesn't even raise her voice. Instead, she whispers guilt into your ears like a lullaby. She wraps her control in softness, in sweetness, in the illusion of care. And you, unaware, begin to mistake manipulation for love. This is the first sign of a low-value woman. Emotional control disguised as affection. She doesn't ask you directly. She implies. She doesn't demand. You just feel obligated. She doesn't say, do this. She says, if you loved me, you would. And slowly, your boundaries begin to blur. Your decisions begin to bend. Your clarity begins to collapse. You start changing plans, ignoring your values, and silencing your instincts. Not because she forced you, but because she made you feel like you had no choice. She weaponizes emotion. She turns vulnerability into leverage. She cries when you set boundaries. She withdraws when you speak truth. She praises you when you comply. She punishes you when you resist. And you begin to live in a psychological maze, where every exit leads back to her approval. You start doubting yourself. You start apologizing for things you didn't do. You start feeling guilty for wanting space, for needing silence, for choosing self-respect. And she watches, not with malice, but with mastery, because she knows that control wrapped in care is harder to detect. She knows that guilt is more effective than aggression. She knows that emotional manipulation is the most invisible form of dominance. And you, the man who once stood tall, begins to shrink. You begin to second-guess your truth. You begin to edit your voice. You begin to betray your own soul. She says, I just want to feel close to you, but what she means is, I want to control how you show up. She says, I'm scared of losing you, but what she means is, I'm scared of losing control. She says, you're the only one who understands me, but what she means is, you're the only one I can manipulate. And the worst part? You start believing her. You start thinking that love means sacrifice. That care means compliance. That affection means obedience. But it doesn't. Real love respects boundaries. Real affection honors autonomy. Real connection celebrates clarity. A high-value woman doesn't guilt you into submission. She invites you into truth. She doesn't punish your independence. She protects it. She doesn't fear your strength. She amplifies it. But the low-value woman fears your clarity. She fears your growth. She fears your awakening. Because the moment you see through her emotional tactics, the spell breaks. The illusion shatters. The control dissolves. And she's left with nothing but her own emptiness. You begin to journal. Where have I compromised my truth? Where have I mistaken guilt for love? Where have I betrayed myself for peace? And the answers come, not in rage, but in revelation. You remember the times you stayed silent to avoid her tears. The times you said yes to avoid her withdrawal. The times you gave in to avoid her emotional storm. And you realize, you weren't loving her. You were surviving her. You weren't connecting. You were complying. You weren't growing. You were shrinking. And now, you choose differently. You choose boundaries over guilt. You choose truth over tactics. You choose self-respect over emotional control. You begin to speak clearly. You begin to act firmly. You begin to walk freely. And she reacts. She cries louder. She withdraws deeper. She accuses harder. But you don't flinch. Because you've seen the game. You've named the pattern. You've reclaimed your power. You are no longer the man who bends. You are the man who builds. You are no longer the man who pleases. You are the man who protects. You are no longer the man who fears her emotions. You are the man who honors his own. And in that honoring, you find peace. In that peace you find power. In that power you find purpose. You are the flame. You are the focus. You are the freedom. She needs attention like oxygen. Not just yours, but everyone's. She doesn't seek connection. She seeks confirmation. She doesn't crave intimacy. She craves visibility. This is the second sign of a low-value woman: validation addiction. She's not content with your love. She needs likes, comments, compliments, and constant reassurance from the world. Her self-worth isn't rooted. It's outsourced. And you, the man who offers depth, begin to feel like a placeholder. Like a mirror she uses to admire herself, not a partner she chooses to build with. She posts photos not to share joy, but to harvest praise. She flirts not to connect, but to collect attention. She's always scanning the room, the feed, the crowd, for someone to notice her. And when you question it, she calls you insecure. When you set boundaries, she calls you controlling. When you ask for respect, she calls you toxic. But the truth is simple: she's addicted to being seen. Not truly seen, but superficially admired. And that addiction is insatiable. You could give her the world, and she'd still need strangers to validate her worth. You could pour your soul into the relationship, and she'd still chase the dopamine of digital applause. You begin to feel invisible, because her gaze is always elsewhere. You begin to feel inadequate, because her hunger for attention never ends. You begin to feel exhausted, because you're competing with a crowd you never signed up to fight. And she thrives in that chaos. She thrives in ambiguity. She thrives in the emotional confusion she creates. One moment she's affectionate, the next she's distant. One moment she's praising you, the next she's posting thirst traps for others. One moment she's yours, the next she's everyone's. And you start questioning yourself. You start wondering if you're enough. You start chasing her approval like a drug. But it's not love. It's a loop. A loop designed to keep you chasing while she keeps collecting. You begin journaling. Where have I mistaken attention for affection? Where have I confused visibility with value? Where have I betrayed my standards for her validation? And the answers come, not in anger, but in awakening. You remember the time she posted seductive photos right after an argument. The time she flirted with others to provoke jealousy. The time she used compliments from strangers to punish your silence. And you realize, she doesn't want love, she wants leverage. She doesn't want partnership, she wants praise. She doesn't want depth, she wants display. And now, you choose differently. You choose clarity over chaos. You choose respect over reaction. You choose peace over performance. You begin to speak your truth, not to control her, but to honor yourself. You begin to set boundaries, not to punish her, but to protect your energy. You begin to walk away, not to hurt her, but to heal yourself. And she reacts. She calls you cold. She calls you distant. She calls you weak. But you don't flinch. Because you've seen the pattern. You've named the addiction. You've reclaimed your power. You are no longer the man who competes for attention. You are the man who commands respect. You are no longer the man who chases validation. You are the man who cultivates value. You are no longer the man who fears being alone. You are the man who chooses alignment. And in that alignment, you find peace. In that peace, you find power. In that power, you find purpose. You are the flame. You are the focus. You are the freedom. She doesn't knock. She barges in. She doesn't ask. She assumes. She doesn't respect your space. She invades it. This is the third sign of a low-value woman: disrespecting boundaries. Not just physical boundaries, but emotional, mental, spiritual ones. She doesn't see your solitude as sacred. She sees it as rejection. She doesn't honor your silence. She interprets it as punishment. She doesn't accept your limits. She tests them, breaks them, mocks them. And you, the man who once stood firm, begin to bend. You begin to explain your every move. You begin to justify your every breath. You begin to apologize for needing space, for setting limits, for protecting your peace. She calls it love, but it's control. She calls it closeness, but it's coercion. She calls it intimacy, but it's intrusion. You tell her you need time to think. She floods you with messages. You tell her you're not ready to talk. She shows up uninvited. You tell her you're working on something important. She interrupts with emotional drama. And slowly, your world begins to shrink. Your focus begins to fracture. Your energy begins to drain. You start living in defense, guarding your time, your thoughts, your truth. But no matter how clearly you speak, she doesn't listen. Because she's not interested in understanding you, she's interested in controlling you. She sees your boundaries not as bridges, but as barricades. And she's determined to tear them down. She'll say, "If you loved me, you wouldn't need space." She'll say, "Why are you hiding things from me?" She'll say, "You're so distant lately." But what she really means is, "I can't stand not being in control." You begin journaling. Where have I allowed my boundaries to be broken? Where have I confused intrusion with intimacy? Where have I betrayed my own limits for her comfort? And the answers come, not in rage, but in realization. You remember the times you stayed on calls for hours when you needed rest. The times you canceled plans to soothe her insecurity. The times you gave up your solitude to avoid her emotional storms. And you realize, you weren't being loving, you were being invaded. You weren't being present, you were being pressured. You weren't being supportive, you were being suffocated. And now, you choose differently. You choose boundaries over guilt. You choose solitude over surveillance. You choose clarity over chaos. You begin to speak your truth, not to hurt her, but to honor yourself. You begin to set limits, not to punish her, but to protect your peace. You begin to walk away, not to abandon her, but to return to yourself. And she reacts. She calls you selfish. She calls you cold. She calls you distant. But you don't flinch. Because you've seen the pattern. You've named the invasion. You've reclaimed your space. You are no longer the man who bends. You are the man who builds. You are no longer the man who pleases. You are the man who protects. You are no longer the man who fears her reaction. You are the man who respects his own rhythm. And in that rhythm, you find peace. In that peace, you find power. In that power, you find purpose. You are the flame. You are the focus. You are the freedom. She doesn't seek peace. She fears it. She doesn't crave stability. She sabotages it. She doesn't build calm. She burns it. This is the fourth sign of a low-value woman. Drama as a lifestyle. Not occasional conflict. Not emotional honesty. But chaos as her comfort zone. She thrives in tension. She feeds on friction. She creates storms just to feel alive. And you, the man who once valued serenity, begin to live in emotional turbulence. You never know what version of her you'll meet. One moment she's affectionate, the next she's explosive. One moment she's laughing, the next she's crying. One moment she's praising you, the next she's punishing you. And you start walking on eggshells, not because you're weak, but because you're exhausted. You start editing your words, your tone, your truth, just to avoid the next eruption. But no matter how careful you are, the drama finds you. Because it's not about you, it's about her addiction to emotional intensity. She doesn't want resolution, she wants reaction. She doesn't want clarity, she wants conflict. She doesn't want healing. She wants heat. She'll start arguments over nothing. She'll twist your words into weapons. She'll turn small issues into emotional warfare. And when you try to stay calm, she accuses you of being cold. When you try to walk away, she calls you a coward. When you try to set boundaries, she calls you controlling. But the truth is simple. She's addicted to chaos. It gives her power. It gives her attention. It gives her identity. And you, the man who once stood in peace, begin to drown in her storms. You begin journaling. Where have I mistaken intensity for intimacy? Where have I confused chaos with connection? Where have I betrayed my peace for her passion? And the answers come, not in rage, but in revelation. You remember the nights you stayed up arguing over imagined offenses. The days you canceled plans to manage her moods. The moments you lost yourself trying to soothe her storms. And you realize, you weren't loving her. You were surviving her. You weren't connecting. You were calming. You weren't growing. You were gaslit. And now, you choose differently. You choose peace over performance. You choose clarity over chaos. You choose truth over turbulence. You begin to speak your truth, not to provoke her, but to protect yourself. You begin to walk away, not to punish her, but to preserve your energy. You begin to set boundaries, not to control her, but to reclaim your calm. And she reacts. She calls you boring. She calls you distant. She calls you weak. But you don't flinch. Because you've seen the pattern. You've named the addiction. You've reclaimed your power. You are no longer the man who fears her fire. You are the man who walks in light. You are no longer the man who absorbs her chaos. You are the man who cultivates calm. You are no longer the man who performs peace. You are the man who practices it. And in that practice you find strength. In that strength you find sight. In that sight you find self. You are the flame. You are the focus. You are the freedom. She never says, I was wrong. She never says, I'm sorry. She never says, I'll do better. This is the fifth sign of a low-value woman, lack of accountability. She doesn't take ownership. She takes offense. She doesn't reflect. She deflects. She doesn't apologize. She attacks. Every mistake becomes your fault. Every conflict becomes your crime. Every emotion becomes your responsibility. And you, the man who once stood in truth, begin to drown in distortion. You start questioning your memory. You start doubting your instincts. You start apologizing for things you didn't do. Because she's mastered the art of blame. She turns every disagreement into a courtroom. She plays the victim with precision. She rewrites history with emotion. And you, the man who seeks resolution, are left chasing clarity in a fog of confusion. She'll say, you made me act this way. She'll say, if you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have reacted. She'll say, you always twist things. But what she really means is, I refuse to look at myself. She fears introspection. She fears growth. She fears responsibility. Because accountability requires maturity, and she's addicted to emotional shortcuts. You begin journaling. Where have I accepted blame that wasn't mine? Where have I silenced my truth to protect her ego? Where have I betrayed my clarity for her comfort? And the answers come, not in rage, but in revelation. You remember the times you apologized just to end the argument. The times you stayed silent to avoid her emotional storm. The times you took the fall to preserve the peace. And you realize, you weren't resolving, you were rescuing. You weren't connecting, you were collapsing. You weren't loving, you were losing yourself. And now, you choose differently. You choose truth over tension. You choose clarity over chaos. You choose self-respect over emotional rescue. You begin to speak your truth, not to win, but to witness. You begin to set boundaries, not to punish, but to protect. You begin to walk away, not to abandon, but to awaken. And she reacts. She calls you cruel. She calls you arrogant. She calls you selfish. But you don't flinch, because you've seen the pattern. You've named the distortion. You've reclaimed your power. You are no longer the man who absorbs blame. You are the man who honors truth. You are no longer the man who fears conflict. You are the man who cultivates clarity. You are no longer the man who performs peace. You are the man who practices integrity. And in that integrity you find strength. In that strength you find sight. In that sight you find self. You are the flame. You are the focus. You are the freedom. She doesn't love. You earn her affection. She doesn't give. You must qualify. She doesn't connect. You must perform. This is the sixth sign of a low-value woman. Transactional love. Her care has conditions. Her warmth has a price. Her loyalty has a scoreboard. You're not her partner. You're her provider. You're not her equal. You're her investment. You're not her man. You're her means. And you, the man who once loved freely, begin to live in a silent negotiation. Every gesture is measured. Every moment is monetized. Every emotion is evaluated. She doesn't ask how you feel. She asks what you've done. She doesn't ask who you are. She asks what you can offer. She doesn't ask what you dream. She asks what you can deliver. And slowly, your soul begins to shrink. You stop expressing. You start performing. You stop sharing. You start calculating. You stop loving. You start trading. She'll say, I just want to feel secure, but what she means is, I want to control the terms. She'll say, I need a man who provides, but what she means is, I need a man who obeys. She'll say, I deserve the best, but what she means is, I deserve to be served. And you begin to lose yourself, not because you're weak, but because you're weary. Weary of proving. Weary of pleasing. Weary of paying for love that never arrives. You begin journaling. Where have I mistaken performance for partnership? Where have I confused provision with presence? Where have I betrayed my soul for her approval? And the answers come, not in rage, but in revelation. You remember the times you bought gifts to fix silence. The times you worked overtime to earn affection. The times you sacrificed your peace to maintain her praise. And you realize, you weren't loving her. You were leasing her loyalty. You weren't connecting. You were contracting. You weren't growing. You were grinding. And now, you choose differently. You choose love over leverage. You choose truth over transaction. You choose soul over scorecard. You begin to speak your truth. Not to negotiate, but to nourish. You begin to set boundaries, not to punish, but to protect. You begin to walk away, not to abandon, but to awaken. And she reacts. She calls you broke. She calls you selfish. She calls you weak. But you don't flinch, because you've seen the pattern. You've named the price. You've reclaimed your power. You are no longer the man who pays for peace. You are the man who lives in purpose. You are no longer the man who earns affection. You are the man who embodies love. You are no longer the man who fears rejection. You are the man who honors his own worth. And in that worth you find peace. In that peace you find power. In that power you find purpose. You are the flame. You are the focus. You are the freedom. You've seen the signs. You've felt the patterns. You've lived the confusion. And now you understand. It was never about her. It was about you. About the man you became while trying to love someone who didn't know how to love herself. About the strength you lost while trying to hold someone who only knew how to pull. About the clarity you abandoned while trying to explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. This is the truth most men never speak. Low-value women don't just drain your time, they drain your soul. They don't just challenge your patience, they erode your purpose. They don't just test your emotions, they rewrite your identity. And you, the man who once stood in power, begin to shrink, not because you're weak, but because you're wounded. Wounded by manipulation. Wounded by chaos. Wounded by the slow erosion of your own standards. But now you see clearly. You see that emotional manipulation isn't love, it's control. That validation addiction isn't intimacy, it's insecurity. That boundary violation isn't closeness, it's coercion. That drama isn't passion, it's pathology. That lack of accountability isn't vulnerability, it's avoidance. That transactional love isn't connection, it's currency. And you, the man who once tolerated it all in the name of love, now choose differently. You choose truth over tension. You choose peace over performance. You choose self-respect over survival. You begin journaling. What did I learn from her? What did I lose in that relationship? What did I gain by walking away? And the answers come, not in bitterness, but in brilliance. You remember the nights you stayed silent to avoid her storms. The days you gave more than you had just to keep her calm. The moments you betrayed your own soul to preserve the illusion of connection. And you realize, you weren't weak, you were loyal. You weren't blind. You were hopeful. You weren't broken, you were becoming. Becoming the man who no longer tolerates emotional games. Becoming the man who no longer fears solitude. Becoming the man who no longer trades his truth for temporary affection. You begin to rebuild, not with rage, but with rhythm. You begin to reconnect, not with her, but with yourself. You begin to rise, not with noise, but with knowing. You are no longer the man who bends. You are the man who builds. You are no longer the man who pleases. You are the man who protects. You are no longer the man who fears rejection. You are the man who honors his own worth. And in that worth you find peace. In that peace you find power. In that power you find purpose. You are the flame. You are the focus. You are the freedom. And now you walk forward, not bitter, but better. Not guarded, but grounded. Not closed, but clear. You walk with wisdom. You walk with strength. You walk with silence. Because you've learned that the most dangerous woman is not the one who screams, but the one who smiles while she steals your soul. You've learned that the most powerful man is not the one who dominates, but the one who discerns. You've learned that the most sacred love is not the one you chase, but the one you choose. And now, you choose differently. You choose depth. You choose dignity. You choose devotion, to yourself, to your truth, to your future. You are the flame. You are the focus. You are the freedom.